So, I'm Virginia Weaver, and I direct the Occupational and Environmental Medicine Residency Program at Johns Hopkins. And we have traditionally had a relationship with the International Association of Firefighters for many years, in which our residents rotate through the union offices in Washington, D.C. And it's an excellent opportunity for resident physicians who are learning about occupational and environmental medicine to learn about the unique hazards that firefighters face, and also to learn about the benefits that a union can provide to its membership. We've had a number of graduates of our program go on and do medical director capacity roles for firefighter departments. So it's been a great opportunity for me.
I'm Marilyn Roberts. I'm a professor at the University of Washington in the School of Public Health, and for the last 5 years I've been working with MRSA and firefighters, and I'll be talking tomorrow in the infectious disease section.
I'm Ellen Kessler. I'm one of the graduates of the Johns Hopkins program, got involved with the IAFF. And now I'm the medical director of the Occupational Health Services program for the Inova Health Systems, which is in Northern Virginia, and we provide a lot of services for firefighters and safety in Northern Virginia area.
I'm Melissa McDermott. I'm an occupational medicine physician and a clinical toxicologist at the University of Maryland in Baltimore. And I've had a long-standing relationship with the IAFF. Ellen and I were in the first class of residents that rotated through the safety office with Rich Duffy in 1986, 1987, and we have been kind of doing it ever since. So I'm happy to be here.
I'm Joanna Gatens, and I'm at the University of Maryland with Dr. McDermott, and I'm one of the ones working on the Wellness Fitness Initiative Registry.
Hey, we have more over here, so. I'm not sure who's supposed to be participating, but everybody's welcome, so.
My name is Tom Hales. I work for NIOSH in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I coordinate the firefighter fatality program cardiovascular disease group.
I'm Jim Brown from Indianapolis. I own and operate Safe Responder LLC. It's just a consulting group that does physiologic analyses of and human impact studies in the fire service.
Hello, I'm Judy Eisenberg. I work with Tom at NIOSH in Cincinnati. I'm a medical officer. My background is emergency medicine and toxicology, and recently I've been doing work on rhabdomyolysis in firefighters.
And for those of you that just came in to participate, if you have questions, we're asking you to write them down so we can try to divvy them up in some way. And so if you have questions, can you raise your hand so we can get them collected here? If you don't have questions, we have to make them up. Yeah. Yeah, I know that. I was trying to make this voluntary, but
Right.
you got drafted.
My name is Steve Moffitt, and I'm the clinical coordinator physician for Indianapolis Fire Department Wellness Program. Work with about 250 fire departments throughout the state of Indiana, but IFD is our major department that we work with, and I've enjoyed it immensely over the past 20 years. So
Okay.
I'm going to go ahead and volunteer Don Stewart here.
I'm not on the panel today, but my name is
yes,
Don
you
Stewart.
are. Yes, you are now. You just
I've
got
been
volunteered. Drafted and volunteered. That's
All right, sir. Thank
they're
you.
close.
I've been involved in aerospace and occupational medicine for my whole career, first with the space program in the last 15 years as medical director of Fairfax County Occupational Health Center. I've been quite involved with Melissa and others on the Wellness Fitness Initiative and in the data collection part of that.
Yeah. Anybody else to get volunteered? If not, you got questions? Yep, more. We get those handed in. It's supposed to be a round table, and they leave out the round table, so this is sort of, okay.
Sure, I'll just jump in here real quick. I'm Jackie McDowell. I'm one of the resident physicians working down in D.C. So if you do have any questions that you're writing down, just kind of wave them a little bit, and I'll be watching for that signal from you.
I'm trying to read the first question. It has a handwriting similar to mine, which is, I think it must have been a doctor put it in. How does ASC affect physical performance? We know maximum heart rate decreases. What else happens with age? It's actually, what is age, not ASC? Now I get it. Now I get it. So what happens as you get older? Who wants to take that? How about our resident? You're the youngest. Not biased. Maybe you are biased. It's age is the...
I don't think anybody wants to know the answer to that question. Go ahead. I honestly don't know scientifically. I couldn't answer either. Here.
Mhm. Okay.
I can tell what happens with age from my personal experience. That you get your physical endurance is not as good. It hurts longer, and it takes longer to repair itself. It is a quick answer. I don't know. I have not sort of looked at that. I think there clearly are, from a histological standpoint, muscle cells, there's a clearly decrement in the number of cells and recruitment of muscle cells, and strength declines with age. I think that's been well shown in laboratory studies and animal studies and human studies. How that affects the actual performance of the job, I don't know. I don't know that. Maybe someone else does.
Mhm.
I was just going to say that just by virtue of age alone, there's an increased incidence of hypertension, and there's an increased incidence of BMI, which leads to overweight and obesity, and all of those things, as you combine them together, by virtue of just the risk factors themselves, lead to increased incidence of cardiovascular disease and or decreased or deconditioning. So I think just by virtue of deconditioning, you're going to end up with less and less functional capacity to be able to perform the essential functions of the firefighter. So I think, and that's the whole battleground, is to fight at the level of increasing fitness, endurance, and capability over the long term of the career of a firefighter, which is, is 32 years for most people. So.
Just to add a couple of things quickly. My colleagues have covered the main things. And for men, primarily one of the things that happens as we age and as we get in our 40s and 50s, our testosterone levels drop every year a little bit. And along with that, we lose skeletal muscle mass. So you're working with less muscle. We tend to, the overall metabolic processes tend to slow down a little bit. What we see on a practical and clinical level is that we watch folks in their, starting in their 40s and their 50s, they tend to gain a pound or two every year. And, as a doc taking care of firefighters, read up on the metabolic syndrome, because there's some really exciting and new discoveries. We're starting to understand that these fat cells are very metabolically active, and they're putting out a lot of chemical mediators that promote coronary heart disease and other problems. So read up on metabolic syndrome. There's a lot of new thinking, and also a lot of new thinking about diet. But the main thing is your metabolism slows, your muscles shrink, and it takes more effort to stay fit. I always look at the job that you folks do as kind of that of as an industrial athlete. And I admire and respect the kind of physical stamina, mental ability it takes to do what you do, but it gets harder every year, so you have to work harder at it. Any other docs?
I have a related question here, somewhat related. Has anybody ever considered studying the synergistic impact of a career of using an SCBA specifically? Does the dry air of an SCBA as it dehydrates the lung, does that do any damage to the lung over a long period of time? Anybody want to take a shot at that one? I think the answer is probably we don't know, is my guess. It doesn't appear to have a high impact, but firefighters are exposed to so much other things that may damage the lung. It's not, I don't think we can say that SCBA doesn't contribute, but I don't think it is certainly a very significant contributor. I'm not aware of any data at all that would even allow you to look at that now at this point in time. Anybody? Okay. Another sort of fitness question. I believe some of you worked on 1582, but where can you find a list of medication? They want, meaning specific medications, not just general categories, for incumbent firefighters that would keep them from passing a physical exam, either using or relative specifically to the 1582 standard.
1582 does not have a list of medications. I think it just mentions a few as far as beta blockers and narcotics. However, there isn't a document for the police, which ACOM has recently released. It's trying to recreate 1582 for the law enforcement officer. And as part of that document, which is available on the web for a charge, there is a charge for it, they're listed every single medication in the PDR, and you actually can type in the drug, and it puts it into one of 5 categories, which is considered no problem, potentially a problem in that when you first start the drug, you don't know how you're going to react to it, and it may be fine after the first few doses. And then there's a 3rd category, which is the drug itself is not bad, but the condition you're prescribing it for is you should be restricted for. And then the 4th category is the drug is bad, and narcotics would be in that source. So that is one potential source, which isn't for firefighters, it's for police, but you know, it's something to give you a guideline for anyway.
I think just in general, by virtue of the types of firefighters that we see for return to work, the biggest categories that we're usually looking at are anti-epileptic medications or seizure medications, diabetic medications, which really create a need for a greater focus on the duty status of that individual, as well as blood thinners, warfarin, Coumadin, and then as Tom said, Dr. Hale said, the narcotics being another major class. But I think those are the main ones that I kind of see, Don. Yeah, benzodiazepines, the long-acting benzos are also just kind of raise a flag, and you kind of determine whether or not there are any major underlying manifestations of long-term use of those medications. So.
Here's another provocative NFPA question. Anybody here sit on will admit to sitting on the NFPA medical committee, standard committee? Or maybe even if you don't sit out, the real question is, as an occupational doctor, does anyone here have an opinion on the NFPA medical standard?
Okay. Well, I kind of have the best of both worlds here because I do sit on the NFPA 1500 committees, including the 1582, but the municipality where I work does not use it. They have their own, they have their own dedicated standard. Now, the 1582 standard, full compliance with the 1582 standard is difficult to achieve. It's a very dense standard. There's a lot in there. It's gotten more user-friendly. It's gone through several revisions in the last 5 to 8 years that have made it kind of more in compliance with, and in spirit, more like the Wellness Fitness Initiative. But the 1582 is still, to implement it to the letter is still very difficult. One thing that a lot of times, you know, particularly docs early in their career, or docs if they're just too closely aligned with the business interests of the departments. Medical standards are guidelines. They're not absolute laws. If we had an absolute law to address every medical condition, we'd have to have, it'd be like a set of law books. It'd be 20, 3-inch books. So there's a lot of clinical judgment involved. There's hopefully a lot of common sense involved. I see our job, when we're doing it well, our job is to keep keep you guys and women working. You know, that's the highest function of our job, is to keep you guys working. And sometimes to do that, we accept a little bit of risk too. I tend to be a little more liberal than some, but 1582 standard it's a consensus standard, it's a national standard. It is hard to be 100% compliant, but a lot of what medical standards come down to is, you know, it's difficult to run a program without any medical standards. If you have medical standards, particularly in the era of ADA, it's difficult because everybody who gets denied wants to claim that they have a disability and they want to sue the municipality. So it's kind of a complex time for docs because we're torn both ways. But you know, I think we have to be humanistic, fair, caring. You know, if I've got an 18-year employee who just needs to get to another couple of years so he can get his pension, sometimes I'll take some risks on behalf of that individual. I'm not sure, did that answer the question, whoever asked that question? Sure.
I think one of the things, as Don said, it really is a guideline. There's actually one part of the 1582 that's an actual codified standard, and that's the vision standard for somebody driving a fire truck. Other than that, you really look at the essential functions of the job, and there are 13 that are very specifically laid out. And so it really is case by case, and you actually look and see if the individual really can meet those standards. There could be times when an individual sort of barely makes every standard, but because there is a myriad of different issues, that person may not be, you know, overall fit, whereas somebody who doesn't meet a standard but otherwise is, you know, very healthy and has proved that they've been able to do the job over many years, that's a different story.
Yeah.
It's really case by case.
Yeah, just to elaborate that, I mean, I sat on the first NFPA 1582. Melissa, I believe, was also on that. I can't remember what it was called back then, but and then I got sort of kicked off after I criticized it based on just what Ellen said, that it really is a lot of it is a guideline, and it's an individual determination, and as much as we'd like to have clear-cut standards, I think it's probably impossible, and it, you know, sort of a consensus process of how you do that, and it certainly can be misapplied, and in certain circumstances, and so I think you have to take it in that context, and some people don't like to. They like to make it a little bit more rigid than.
Yeah, and it's not, because the standards change over time, so in itself they're not rigid.
Yeah.
So you can't be rigid to
Yeah.
something that is a moving target sometimes.
Yeah, and it may depend on your particular fire department. You may have, you know, you just said you may be comfortable being able to monitor a certain person, or you know their function better, and can sort of stretch the limits a little bit for that person approaching retirement or some other circumstance like that. So.
Well, there's a follow-up question. As OCDOCs, what standards do they use for return to work, to suppression work after injury or illness? And it's really basically the same thing. It's case by case. You know, obviously the standard / guidelines feed into it. You always, I think the important thing is you want to get people back to work. I mean, that's really what it's all about, to get back to work in a safe, you know, manner. So it's really basically the same answer.
Yeah. I mean, the other side of that is just remember that NFPA 15 also provided protection, particularly for a lot of older firefighters and so forth. But it's the first time it's set out, and I deal a lot in the construction industry, and there are firms out there that claim they have similar standards for construction workers that have never been validated and really don't work very well, and they use that basically to discriminate against people with, you know, back problems or older individuals and so forth. So in some ways it provides protection, but it certainly can be misapplied. Yeah, you're going to elaborate?
For some departments, they have the advantage of having a work performance evaluation, and so in those cases,
Yeah.
when the physician is on the fence, or if there's an issue where you may have a range of motion concern or a fitness capacity concern, as a physician advocating for the firefighter, in certain municipalities, they do have work performance testing, which really kind of changes the whole dialogue then, because then you have a medical condition or orthopedic condition that the person still can do the essential functions of the job. And so that gives the physician a high level of comfort, as well as the firefighter in returning back to full duty.
Yeah.
I am on the 1582 committee, I just a comment that it's a little bit like making sausage. It's sort of, I think the end product is okay, but you don't want to sort of see how it's made, and it's not necessarily a pleasant or scientific process. It is a consensus document because a lot of times there isn't scientific information to make that judgment. In that same study, every evaluation has to be an individualized assessment. That's the law. American Disability Act, ADA, says that each one has to be an individualized assessment. Within 1582, I sort of divide it up into two groups. One is the risk of sudden incapacitation, where if you're in an IDLH environment and you go down, you put yourself at risk, but also the people that your peers at risk as well as the mission. And then the second issue is for a lot of the musculoskeletal and other conditions, it's can you do the job? And my perspective there is if you have a good physical ability or job performance evaluation, it's not so much a medical issue, it's can you demonstrate that you can do the job? And then who am I to get, if you can demonstrate you can do that, who am I to get in that way? And one of the questions here that along that same line is, how does NIOSH's cardiac line of duty death determine their recommendations for implementing an IPAT, which I think means the physical ability test, in a way to address concern over the high number of cardiac events in the fire service? And I think, because I do those death and on-duty fatality investigations, and we write recommendations, and within that we also do sort of a general health and safety check on the department about what programs we think they should have in place, regardless of whether they may have a relationship to that cardiac fatality. And in that case, many departments don't have either candidate or member physical ability recommendations to have that. And we recommend that as part of NFPA 1500, which says that should be developed for each department. So it may not be specifically related to the cardiac death, but it's an overall safety and health program which we think departments should have.
Okay. Change focus a little bit. This is an infectious disease question, but sort of related to fitness for duty. How does the fire doctor handle the HIV positive firefighter? Who is notified? How much information is given? And the comment is NFPA is not real clear on this. You want to take that either from the NFPA or the more general perspective?
Once again, ADA tells us that we really can't discriminate in hiring someone who has that kind of an illness unless the nature of the medical illness is such that it's imminent and very serious or significant. You can't medically disqualify someone for that. So in our department, we have an individual who I medically cleared roughly 8 or 10 years ago who's Hep C positive, and this is kind of a comparable, I guess, clinical illness. And we also have one HIV positive employee. And until their medical symptoms become so debilitating that they can't do the essential job tasks, then they're allowed to stay in the field. You get into sometimes problematic issues with their coworkers in the firehouse who can have some fairly discriminatory attitudes about working with someone who has a chronic infectious illness. So we end up, and it's the right of that person that nobody should really know in the field that they have this illness, but usually it's the employee that talks. It's not the medical docs, because we know that it's like walking into a law practice. You know, our license is on the line if we, you know, go blabbing about someone's medical condition. So anyway, under ADA, individuals with those conditions would be, just to reiterate what Dr. Samis said, volunteer firefighter who's positive HIV positive, do the medical personnel have to tell anybody that? I don't believe so, just because, I mean, legally you don't have to. I don't, Tom or anybody else? Steve, would you change any of that?
We've had one case, and in that particular case, we ended up telling the health and safety individual, who obviously has a sworn duty to confidentiality. And I think we also wanted to do that in light of the fact that we had a concern over, wanted to make sure from a city legal standpoint and from those perspectives that we were at least on the same page with regard to what we need to do. But everything that Dr. Stewart said from the standpoint after that, basically we follow the same type of procedure. And it usually is the firefighter themselves that volunteers that information to the other fellow firefighters, and that's when it becomes a fire station issue. And then there's a lot of education that goes along with that. There's a lot of misinformation with regard to hepatitis C and AIDS. And so we've done a lot of debriefings in some firehouses with regard to the actual education of the condition and what are the likelihood of transmission and those sorts of things. So. Well, they usually want to wash everything, you know, and go through that transition process of that. But we deal very, very closely with the infectious disease doctors with regard to that. But then also, the one thing that we continually remind ourselves of are just the bloodborne pathogen types of things with regard to how you, glove up and how you keep your hands washed and gear cleaned and all of that. So that's kind of in basic how we handle MRSA. Anything different?
There's always somebody in the department who's considered a need to know. So somebody, and that person, I think for you, must have been the health and safety individual, who in case there is an event or something where somebody has to come to that individual's rescue, or if there's some untoward thing, there is information there, but it's something that you have to, if you're walking a very tight line, you really have to look at the risk and benefit of doing something like that.
And that's the problem, because this is a volunteer group, so there is one contact that's I'm not comfortable enough with our volunteering units to know whether or not we can experience safety people like our health.
Yeah.
Safety people are a career group, so, and I can meet this volunteer
Hmm.
one by one doctor about the patient, now I'm going to go, I really need to go back. He's on meds.
Mhm.
And the doctor on status, but then he's a volunteer after, so I'm not going to tell him, in fact, also like to go back.
Yeah. Now we've confused you more, but that's
I mean, I think
Good.
my take home is that there's always somebody I need to contact with a volunteer. As far as this
yeah.
Yeah, just identifying who that is and also waiting to see, what his status is. It's almost
Yeah.
not that much different from other illnesses. And so is he static and stable? Is he, a risk to others? And it may be something that requires more monitoring at some point. So.
Chris, following up on MRSA, we have another question here. What do you say to a pension disability fund which wants a definitive source patient when a firefighter gets MRSA? They say firefighters are not at higher risk because It is everywhere.
I guess
Anybody?
I'll take a stab at that. There are 5 states now that do recognize MRSA as a firefighter-related illness, and they do appropriate pensioning. In the state of Washington, we don't have that, but I've been told if somebody would apply, they would get approval for it. We've looked at 2 fire stations, and you do see MRSA in the fire stations. We've also done 40 firefighters, and the data for the community is roughly 1.5% to 2% carry MRSA. If you look at various professions, some hospital staff may have 12%. Vets can have up to 12%. If you're looking at nursing staff from a long-term care facility where maybe 50% of their patients are MRSA positive, they may have 35% carriage. And out of our 40 firefighters, 22% were MRSA positive. And another 10% carried Staph aureus, and 60% of those organisms were the same as what we found in the fire station. So the data is still very thin, but it's certainly suggestive that there may be increased risk, just like there is increased risk for nurses and others that work with patients that are positive. But there's not enough data, and we really need more research, which requires dollars for the definitive answer.
Anybody want to elaborate on? Yeah.
I'll just quickly comment about MRSA, then we have another question about
Okay.
1582. We had an individual who contracted MRSA. We had actually more than a handful in a department of 1,500 people who have had MRSA, and it created a huge political issue in the fire department, so we convened a group and developed kind of a resource manual. And our policy is, you know, we don't put people back in the field until their lesions are all dry treated and covered, is our criteria for putting somebody back in the field after they've had MRSA. And we've had some pretty horrific cases, you know, including you know, those requiring several surgeries. We have one individual who's at a firehouse that runs several nursing homes almost continually. And so he contracted MRSA, he filed a claim, and the workers' comp denied it just for the reasons that were mentioned, that it's in the community. My own personal feeling is the preponderance of risk for an employee in a fire and rescue company to contract MRSA is at work. It's you know, if you could then, if they don't have it in their home, you know, if they don't have a family member with it, etc. But you know, the workers' comp programs, vendors in a tight economy are going to tend to err on the side of you know, not approving claims. I'll go ahead and do, this is a follow-up question on 1582, and it says, was it ever the intent for 1582 to be a performance standard rather than a medical standard? There are some occupational medicine companies who would remove firefighters from duty for not attaining 14 METs on a stress test, calling them medically unfit. Once again, you know, the practice of medicine is legislated by state, but it's a very, you know, it varies from clinic to clinic, doc to doc. I think that would be wrong. We use what's called a Bruce Protocols graded exercise stress test. We do a stress test every year on firefighters over the age of 40. Our standard, our ideal is kind of 12 minutes. If I have somebody who goes 11 minutes and they're an incumbent, that's acceptable, you know, a 50-year-old guy who goes 11 minutes. If I have someone who comes in and they can only do 6 or 7 minutes, that individual I might pull out of the field. But to do 14 minutes and get medically disqualified, I think, is unconscionable. I don't know what any of my colleagues... Yeah, 12 is kind of, actually, I think, the 1582 standard. And the 12 METs came from supposedly it's equivalent to running 1.5 miles. It's illegal under ADA to have arbitrary standards. So where a lot of the fire departments used to use 1.5 mile run as their physically qualifying standard. You can't really legally do that. So we've medicalized some of these things. But yeah, 12 METs is certainly an acceptable level for structural firefighting. Yeah, it's very rare for us to pull someone out of the field for physical, for lack of physical endurance. We do a work performance evaluation, which is kind of a slightly dumbed down CPAT, and we're now doing it annually. And in a group of 1,500 firefighters, we have about 10 or 12 every year who don't pass it, generally because they're not training, they could train for 3 months prior to it and get through it. The minimum time on our test is 10:43, Jessica, is that right? 10:47. And it's a real scary thing because it potentially threatens their career. But what our department now has done is it's made them take some of their own leave, which is a slightly punitive measure. But then after they burned 144 hours of their own leave, they can come on non-job related light duty. And we train them, and we have an athletic trainer and a physical therapist that works with our folks. And sometimes it'll take us 2 or 3 months to get them in shape, to go. But our department's decided to do it because they believe that it elevates everybody's level of fitness to at least some degree.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure where that 14 MET number came from, but the current 1582 has, you have to make a distinction between a MET level for exercise and an exercise stress test to screen for coronary artery disease. NFPA 1582, the 2007 version, have no MET level aerobic capacity requirement. Let me repeat that. There's no aerobic capacity requirement in 1582 if you do not have coronary artery disease. If you're diagnosed with coronary artery disease and have coronary artery disease, either previous heart attack, stent placement, bypass surgery, etc., if you have coronary disease, in the appendix, which is not part of the official standard, it says you must get up to 12 METs and have a negative stress test up to 12 METs. That's the only place where there's a MET level requirement in 1582. If you have coronary disease and you have a stress test with no ischemic changes. There are other hoops you have to jump through once you have coronary disease. And the reason why that is that the biggest risk factor for sudden incapacitation associated with a coronary event is having a previous coronary artery disease. So if you're diagnosed with it, NFPA has a lot of hoops you have to jump through in order to get back on the job if you have known coronary disease. But currently there is no MET requirement for aerobic capacity, and if you do have coronary disease, you have to get to 12 METs and have a negative stress test. Among the other risk factors have to be negative and no smoking and other things like that.
Okay. Some related fitness questions. Is the annual Wellness Fitness Initiative physical exam considered a fitness for duty exam?
Yeah, that's a very significant question.
Yeah.
Because we've dealt in the past with the issue of the Wellness Fitness Initiative being non-punitive. And in some instances, obviously firefighters can determine that if the exam causes them to be restricted from duty or something like that is a punitive measure. I think one of the intents of the WFI is to provide a road back for those firefighters that are with sudden incapacitation, that they can get back to full duty. The data that we have in Indianapolis from the standpoint of WFI, that in an 8-year study that we did, we had 80 individuals that had critical findings that we had to take off duty based upon the wellness fitness exam. And out of those, 77 of those returned to full duty. So and the other two went on disability, the other one retired. So we have a moral obligation as physicians that if we see a sudden incapacitation, that we are mandated by a code, if you will, to not place that firefighter in harm. But by the same token, the intent of the WFI is that it's non-punitive and you get them back to full duty by working with the firefighter to return them to full duty. Any other comments?
Okay. Okay, this is still back to the Wellness Fitness Initiative. In regarding to the EKG stress testing and so forth done with the Wellness Fitness Initiative, are the wellness doctors reading these, or are they being sent off to be read by a cardiologist?
In our office, and I suspect it's very similar with Dr. Stewart, we do all the interpretations ourselves, or I do. And then if we have any issues with regard to borderline or inconclusive types of tests, we have a consulting cardiologist that we will run that person by or that test by. But in the majority of cases, a good physician or an experienced physician can read a treadmill test very, very well. Did you say anything different?
Our practice is exactly the same policies where we look at all 12 lead EKGs. Before we medically certify an employee, which is kind of why the county or the municipality hires us, we review all the results of their physical. So we look at every 12 lead. We have in Fairfax County physicians, not cardiologists, but physicians conducting the treadmills. And we've done thousands of them, so we get pretty good at recognizing those that are clearly negative, clearly positive. And the ones in between, we will often send to a cardiologist. The only thing that's cheap with a cardiology is an overread of a treadmill. That costs less than $50. From there, everything is in the hundreds and thousands of dollars. So it's inexpensive for us to send those out for an overread. I know ANOVA, let me. You have cardiologists there.
Well, we have cardiologists because we're part of a hospital system, and it's part of this hospital requirement that a stress test is read by cardiologists. So for that reason, that's why we have them.
Actually doing the stress test on the firefighter. We've asked the cardiologist to talk to the firefighter if they're on meds, if they've had family history, if they're having endurance issues, any kind of abnormal EKGs in the past. So they get a learning piece, a teaching piece with the cardiologist, which I find is invaluable to some of them, especially that have family history or past medical history. Being part of the ANOVA health system, we have to use a cardiologist, and I like it because then I can bounce it off the cardiologist right there. But they also give back a lot to the patient. And we make the police go through the treadmill too, so.
There's a follow-up thing, and I'll let you answer that, Tom. For EKGs, what should be the general screening strategy? How often, who reads, just asymptomatic, what symptomatic?
Well, currently NFPA 1582 says that you should have an annual resting EKG. My personal feeling is that is not needed. It's a relatively cheap test to do internally, but I don't believe it provides an adequate level of validity about whether you do or don't have coronary disease. That's what the stress test is for, and you do stress tests on people who are at increased risk. You don't do it on everybody. Regarding who does the stress tests and who interprets them, even the American College of Cardiology, American Heart Association says that you do not need a cardiologist to do an exercise stress test or interpret an exercise stress test. They do say that if you have a tech conduct the exercise stress test, that a physician needs to be in the building, and they don't specify next door or but readily available or something like that if somebody goes down. So my personal feeling on the EKG is that it's not needed on an annual basis, that that's currently what 1582 says.
Anybody want to elaborate on that, or if not? Wayne Smith had wanted to ask a question, and he's been very patient. I appreciate that. Okay. Yeah, the idea is to confuse.
I'm going to stand up. The reason why I wanted to ask the questions and make the statements I wanted to verbally, I mean, the paper questions is fine, but you lose some of that to me. I'm Wayne Smith. I'm president of Firefighters Local 416, Indianapolis. I'm the one who basically drafted Dr. Moffitt and said, get up there. We got to have you in this part. Dr. Brown is here. The Dr. Fairfax, I was there in March. Came to see you guys' facility. You know, we've been involved with the wellness and fitness initiative things for how many years, Dr. Moffitt? 2013, but we've been doing physicals and all kind of stuff. We did the studies. Dr. Brown, somewhere along the line, they need to get you. We had the firefighters in full monitor. They were monitored 24 hours a day on duty, and through all the things they did, a lot of information came out of that. I'm just going to go through a few of these things. I heard someone say they were from Maryland. I know we got the information going into the information warehouse in Maryland. We're very big on this whole fitness thing, and we tried all kinds of things. And I guess the question that I wanted to ask the panel, which you'll see my comments, you'll know it was mine, because I said there needs to be more microphones. We're losing a couple of seconds here and there past the microphone, but there's so much information, and to get this much.
Actually, the problem is the stage is too small. We have too many
the
doctors.
space is
and
small, no
not a
round
big
table,
enough,
microphones,
place.
yeah. But really, to get this dynamic of group of educated people together, you know, I'd like to sit here and just sponge and get everything we can. So I guess the general question first, and this you guys can answer them later, is number one, is there anything that we aren't doing? What can we do that we're not doing? Because that's important, and we're a labor organization, and we are very, very, we're very creative, and there's nothing we won't try to do. Between labor and management, Dr. Moffitt's office, we work hard to try to get things done. So that's the first thing. Someone asked a question about the fit for duty versus the WPE or the PFE, and I was going back there saying that's a quick no, because fit for duty is, to me, something different. Dr. Moffitt, he gave the answer that I knew he would. Is that your physical situation is one thing, maybe your mental and some other things over here. So that question was a simple one. We work under what we consider a labor management agreement, and we've worked under it for years. And that's why, to me, it's important that we know what, you know, this field of professionals can tell us, try this, try that. Dr. Moffitt, he's got data forever. He really does. And I know we did there was Novartis. There was a guy from Novartis here. I don't know if he made it down to the meeting yet, but we did a Novartis study. They are a pharmaceutical company who did that. Kind of tooting his horn for him, but, you know, but we do try to do these things. Let me see. What else? Oh, and Dr. Moffitt, the last thing I would like, and he can get into it, is on our department, if you have a negative, or if they see anything in your when you come off your treadmill, as far as your readout or cardiogram, I don't want to get into doctor terms. That's what y'all do. But anyway, I would like for you to tell the procedure that we have adopted now in Indianapolis, so anybody that's not doing it, you can look at it. It's a different way to do business. Thanks.
Thank you, Wayne.
I think what Wayne exemplifies, I think, is the spirit of labor and management together. And as in the presentations earlier on today, we really talked about this as being a cooperative type of program between labor and management and the clinicians and the peer fitness trainers. And as you can see, there's a huge amount of investment in the fire department in these particular programs. One of the things that Wayne's referring to is the issue of
a prevalence of inconclusive or borderline treadmill tests that oftentimes the question is, if you send those to a cardiologist, oftentimes there may be additional testing, which, as Dr. Stewart mentioned, hundreds if not thousands of dollars of additional testing in virtually asymptomatic individuals. In LA County a few years ago, they developed a protocol by which they started doing calcium scores with regard to their particular inconclusive or borderline treadmills in individuals. And in Indianapolis, we pretty much adopted that this year as a pilot, where for those folks that have inconclusive or borderline treadmills, we're sending them off for same-day calcium scores, where basically the firefighter walks in, gets the calcium score. If it's less than a certain number, the firefighter returns to duty that day. If it's over a certain number, then they get a stress echo at a reduced price. And virtually, if that's negative, we'll return back to work the same day. So we were about halfway into that. We started and believed that we were going to have 200 of those in a population of 1,400 people. And if you talk about backfill costs of having to replace a firefighter, if you're going to refer them out for a cardiology evaluation, an average day for backfill is about $750. So by virtue, if you've got 2 days, you've got $1,500 per firefighter that's off duty, which ranks, if you're going to do 100 tests a year, or have to do 100 referrals a year, that's $150,000. Whereas the calcium program that we have is about $10,000 to $15,000. So we've kind of stepped it up from that standpoint. That only gets one type of cardiovascular disease. It only gets the structural cardiovascular disease. It does not get into the inflammation and the other markers that are dealing with cardio, but at least it's a step. I know that Dr. Hales has some thoughts on that, and
Yeah, I tend to be a skeptic, and I think there's a lot in medicine that we are very humbled by continually every year, and particularly when it comes with new treatment modalities or more diagnostic tests that we claim it's new and it's better, and without doing adequate studies, it gets out there in the market and pushed, and then 5 to 10 years down the road, we realize it really wasn't quite as good as we thought it was, and it sort of dies a quick death. I'm not saying that coronary artery calcium scores are there. There's clearly been some studies, white papers done with blue ribbon panels of cardiologists from the AHA and the coronary artery calcium score people that believe that. And they put together a paper in 2000 that said, right now there's no data that it works. They updated that paper in 2007, which says it doesn't work for low-risk people, it doesn't work for high-risk people, and we aren't sure if it works for people with indeterminate or intermediate risk for coronary disease. Now that doesn't mean it's not going to be appropriate, and it may very well be, and you may very well have a great sort of triage program where you refer them down, but I just don't know, I sort of have to rely on that blue ribbon panel to tell me that if you have people with indeterminate diagnostic or full treadmill test, that now you do it through a coronary artery calcium score, that's the way to go. And that's sort of what I wait for. Now, maybe we'll be waiting in 10 more years and spend a bunch of money, and it may be wrong. I don't know. But working for NIOSH, and if we make sort of a bad call on things, and then we get raked over the coals of putting out scientific information that's invalid, and so I tend to get pretty cautious. That's not to say it won't be appropriate. Each individual department has to develop their own program and own protocol. And I think the one for Indianapolis certainly seems to work with you. But, and just one other piece of information. NFPA 1582 says you can do a submax stress test. And it makes that, and I make that distinction between a full or symptom-limiting stress test. And all the validity characteristics of stress tests are done on Bruce protocol full symptom-limiting stress tests. And a lot of departments are doing cycle ergometer, submax stress tests, which really never stress the heart enough. So you're going to have a lot of potentially false negative tests when you use a submax test. So and in our reports, the NIOSH reports, we actually list all the recommendations of various organizations from American Heart Association, NFPA, the DOT, driver's exam, to airplane pilots, to the military, to the U.S. Public Health Service, and all have different guidance regarding when to do stress tests and at what level you do stress tests. And to me, that tells me it's really not completely clear, and their evidence of it is not there. And therefore, if you have a sound program that you think works for you, what am I to say when all these groups can't agree about when to do stress tests and what type of stress tests to do?
I just wanted to briefly comment because we've kind of gone the other direction. We were an early adopter of heart scans, which give you a calcium score, and there's not a lot of compelling evidence in the medical literature one way or another about how to use these. They do help for risk mitigation and risk counseling. You know, calcium scores range from 0 to 400. If they're real high, close to 400, that's helpful. If they're real low, if you got a 0 score, that's helpful. But all it measures is calcified plaque in your heart. It doesn't measure if you've got soft plaque, which is not yet calcified. You're not going to see that, so you could have an 80% occlusion and still have a low calcium score if it evolved fairly quickly. So we started doing calcium scans, heart scans, calcium scoring 13, 14 years ago, and we did it for 6 or 8 years. And we had pretty well scanned everybody who had a questionable treadmill. Another bigger issue really for the Wellness Fitness Initiative, the Wellness Fitness Initiative was derived in fatter economic times. And one of the things that we've talked about, the docs involved in the initiative, is, you know, we're doing a Bruce protocol treadmill test on every firefighter every year over the age of 40, and then on an age-adjusted basis. So we're doing treadmills on 25-year-old athletes, basically, and you're certainly not going to probably find any coronary arterial disease. So, but we find it's a very sensitive test. It's a screening test. So we find a lot of positive tests and indeterminate tests. In most of our population, you guys are highly screened. There's a healthy worker effect. In most of our population, those are not going to be, you know, in a symptom-free person. They're going to be false positives. So then we end up trying to figure out, well, what do we do with these false positives, and what's the legal ramifications of, you know, if that is that 1 in 1,000 30-year-old that has heart disease and dies on the job. So we end up doing, you know, every 2 or 3 years we'll repeat a stress echo. There's some, you know, technology in medicine's always improving our ability to diagnose. There's now, you know, the CAT scan. What am I thinking? I've lost the word. EBCT, not just the heart scan, but the, thank you, CT angiogram, which is a new, relatively recent test, which actually gives you a look at the arteries, almost not quite equivalent to cathing somebody, but almost. So anyway, this is a fairly controversial issue. We've tried to figure out what to do with our false positives and borderline treadmill tests, and a lot of times we just kind of end up kind of eyeballing them from year to year. And I think your approach allows you to sort people into the real bad stack and then maybe okay stacks. Heart scan, what are you paying? $200 or $300? 40 now? Wow. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
we weren't good negotiators. We were paying $300 and $400, but that was 10 years ago. So they've gotten a lot cheaper.
Yeah, let's bring it back to a question right along these lines. Our small department does not follow 1582 and does not have a medical requirement for staff once hired. Would you recommend that a firefighter over 40 have an annual stress test for their own information? Oh, I've got a couple questions I've been saving up for them.
My eyes
That
just
was
got
go-
as big as pancakes when he said, you know, once you're on, you're good to go. I think that's scary, very scary. Tom wants to say something about that also. Tom, do you want to-
you also have to realize that represents probably about 80% of the departments
Yeah,
in this country
yeah, that's,
that
well, that's a good question.
they don't have that, that access. It's a difficult question. I think you have to look at your risk factors, which then paint a picture for your risk of sudden incapacitation or a coronary event in the next 5 to 10 years. And you can use a Framingham score to see what your risk is. If your risk is elevated, sort of in the 10% or greater in the next 5 to 10 years, you need to get that stress test. I personally don't know if I'd start at 40, although that's if you have multiple risk factors and high, yeah, you should start thinking about 40. But it should be you have to worry about that not only because you're a firefighter, but also for your general health as well. So the issue is risk factors plus age. And most of the American Heart Association typically talks about 45 and one or more risk factor. I think if you're 40 with multiple risk factors, you need to consider it, yeah.
Mhm.
The only other caveat that you could use in those particular circumstances, if you can't afford a full WFI, is certainly some sort of risk stratification with a respirator clearance process, whereby based upon the answers to those questions, you will be able to determine whether or not this person may or may not need additional follow-up with regard to the risks that they have. So that may be a lower level of approach in some departments, and we use that in departments that do not have large budgets, such as IFD. And that's a beginning step, and that seems to work pretty well, that we can capture those individuals that need additional testing.
Yeah, but there's a lot of departments that are out there that don't even do that and aren't really required to do it because of their OSHA status and state status and so forth. So I agree with you. It's a sensible approach, and you can do it in a, maybe a little bit more cost-effective on a group level. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it sure can.
I was thinking, well, then who does your medical clearance to wear respirators and stuff? So there's a couple issues. I used to work for OSHA too, but Jim's referring to the fact that municipalities are in this sort of limbo, a legal limbo. But what I like to tell folks who kind of say, well, we're not required because it's this get out of jail free card because we're a municipality, but the rules in terms of health risk, the rules of toxicology, the rules of how much carbon monoxide is going to take before you get whacked. These do not change and do not care whether you're covered or not covered by a municipality get out of jail free card. So in terms of what Wayne was saying, what can unions do or whatever, if you've got nothing, you've got to do something about that. And even if there isn't a legal requirement, you guys are in a high hazard occupation. And I like to remind folks that the legal remedy is still not going to protect you. So you need to do something in addition to that because, it's sort of like Paracelsus, the father of toxicology, didn't get the memo that you guys aren't covered by OSHA, you know?
Yeah, well, I would add that I think in Canada, the sort of wellness has traditionally been much more of a province of the personal physicians. And I don't think there's as much sort of a wellness, employer-based wellness initiatives in Canada. I think it's changing. I'm aware of it in certain parts of Canada and certain departments, but it's a different situation. And some of it may be how do you educate the personal physicians to be aware of those risks. And,
Tom told you the kind of avenue you can take, which is you're still also human beings, and we know about your personal risk and all of that kind of stuff. It's just unfortunate that you have to do. You do have to take your own responsibility. But sometimes, primary care people, you need to explain to them that you're in a high hazard job, and what if. I just would like to make one more comment vis-a-vis something that Wayne said. What could you guys do or whatever? You're in a sort of vanguard, Indianapolis and Fairfax, and probably some of the people that are here are in these vanguard departments. But reflecting also back to something Tom said, when I was preparing for one of the talks I have to give tomorrow, and I saw that it's only 30% of fire departments that have any kind of wellness, fitness, or even not WFI, but something which is like horrific to me. And so I don't know what the fix for that is, but I suppose if some of you are from places like that, you know, you kind of have to get religion and bring that back. And I don't know whether there's a relationship that could develop from places that have them already to, you know, help you out, or if there's someplace in a jurisdiction close to you, or I know, you know, you take care of a number of jurisdictions. I imagine there's a little bit of spillover because you guys are good guys and, you know, try to do that. But, I mean, that might be a thought for you to meet people here or other, you know, departments closer to you that might help you get started.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. Yeah. Comment, question? Then, okay, let me wait a little bit because there's a couple of people, two more questions I want to, people wrote in, I want to get in here. One for, maybe there are three now, okay. Melissa, can you comment on performance enhancement from steroid use in the fire service or other types of
I don't know why you picked
pharmaceutical
on me.
performance enhancement? Is that hazards, concerns, warnings?
Yes.
Yeah.
I guess I don't know what the ilk of the question is.
Yeah. It's looking for a comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a good thing. It's probably, yeah, I mean, I have one patient, not a firefighter, but a patient in another program that we run, and, you know, their lives are, his life is completely crippled by this. So, I just think it's a very, very bad idea. I'm sure this is not the way that anybody wants you to achieve fitness, and I think that probably everybody up here would like to say something similar.
Yeah. Yeah. Is it fair to say that the hazards of such drugs are not well known? I mean, there's a lot of new ones out there now that people are, that, yeah, go ahead. Okay, good.
It's certainly a topic because of, in the fire service, there are all of these types of supplements that firefighters take and do certain types of workouts. And but you're absolutely right, Tony. We do not screen for that. And the only way I've probably seen maybe 5, and they usually come to me as fitness for duties, because the concern is the bulky nature of the firefighter over such a short amount of time, and the concern is this firefighter using steroids? And clearly, if they are, they're at higher risk for cardiovascular and other types of CNS types of central nervous system things as well. But they come to us as doctors as fitness for duty. And it's probably going on more than what we think or know, but there is no screening for it, other than it being noticed by someone becoming bulked up over a short period of time.
Mm-hmm.
I think Steve touched on this briefly in his comment, but there's a clear distinction between, well, for what steroids and things like that are used for. They're not used to enhance fitness. They're used to enhance performance. And I can't think of, other than specific medical conditions where steroids are needed for a medical condition, to correct a medical condition. I'm not a physician, so correct me if I speak out of turn here. Where those things are necessary, that's what they were created for. The use of steroids purely for enhancement of performance, even in high-level competitive athletes, is generally something that jeopardizes their fitness in favor of performance. Those are people who are looking for very short-term cures to a problem. If you take those things long enough, they're going to have adverse effects on your health. And so you have to make that distinction that if you're if you see people that are taking steroids and doing these kind of things to promote health, they're badly mistaken, and they're going down the wrong path. So.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
One of the very basic problems associated with that, and I see this a lot even within the Indianapolis group. A lot of guys who are fitness conscious and really work hard to maintain or improve their fitness. A lot of them are using protein supplements and on high protein diets. And I don't necessarily, the first thing what I do is I come in with a can of tuna fish and set it beside their $150 bottle of protein powder and say, here, I spent $1.50 on this. It does the same thing. But beyond that, these kind of high protein diets also lead to, protein is a osmotically active material, and you put a lot of that stuff in your gut, it tends to dehydrate you. So, and the guys are not aware of these things, and so these kind of high protein diets and using a lot of supplements and there are a lot of adverse effects to that if they're not used properly. And so I kind of preach to those guys about, well, if you're going to do those kind of things, make sure you're hydrating yourself properly and keep track of your hydration, because, you know, we just spent all day today talking about the adverse cardiovascular effects of things like dehydration and that kind of thing, and heat-related injury. And so there's a lot more to those kinds of things than just what it says on the label. And even though they might do some of the things they say on the label, it's all just a product somebody's trying to sell you to do something that you can do naturally.
Yeah, but it would be a good idea for some sort of informational to be available on that, because I think it's certainly pervasive in terms of advertising and so forth. That, yeah.
Actually, I kind of need to add my 2 cents here as a ER doc, and I saw several patients. You know, there are several groups of these types of diet supplements and weight loss materials. A lot of them have stimulants in them, like ephedra to caffeine, and they can cause rapid heart rates, irregular heart rates, and we've had people in the telemetry units for that. Another group are sort of the creatinine, like they were talking about, a lot of the protein. Some of them have actually been associated, when we started looking at the rhabdomyolysis cases, some of them have been directly associated with rhabdomyolysis cases. The creatine use, there are some of the weight loss, like the 5-Hour Energy, they have excessive amounts of caffeine in it. And really, as they were saying, any of the short-term benefits are usually not worth the risks. And if you are going to use it, even some of the herbal supplements, whether it's ginkgo and some of the others, have additional interactions with medications, which, again, you really have to be aware of what's in what you're using to avoid some of these adverse health effects. And I really think that if people sort of take a really good look at what they're using, the benefit may not be worth the risk, because there are just so many out there, and there's also issues of quality control in a lot of these supplements. You may not be getting what you actually think is on the label. So I think there are just so many issues out there with these products that it's buyer beware.
Okay, thank you. One other question here is for Dr. Weaver. You've been spared so far. Are there any studies that link asthma to a career of firefighting?
So it's too bad that Dr. Burgess isn't here, because he
Yeah.
could answer that. I don't know if we have anyone from Arizona who can, but I think that the studies are increasingly showing a link. There's a lot more evidence. He talked this morning a lot about evidence of short-term decrements in pulmonary function in firefighters after smoke exposure. He talked about the lack of protection of respirators other than SCBA, so that increasingly we do need to be aware of lung disease in firefighters, both from routine run-of-the-mill activities as well as events such as the World Trade Center, where there's obviously a huge focus on respiratory effects.
Yeah, wildland firefighters who typically don't use respirators, I guess you should be talking about this, it was an IOSH study looking at incremental decrease in lung function year by year. Yeah. So you're dealing with a healthy well.
Yeah, I would, there's an increased number of articles and studies on that. I don't think they're all clear that it's not all hyper responsiveness, but it's also from a couple studies showing inflammation, which may be more predominant than the hyper responsiveness. So I think it's a lot to learn yet, at least, and these are all looking at short-term effects, not long-term for the most part, except for the wildland study, I believe. Tom, do you want to add anything on that, or no? Okay, good. Any other question? I think we've run through the written. Oh, there's one. You can
Yeah.
answer it then.
Well, I can only answer part of it, and then I'm going to ask for Dr. Moffett and Dr. Stewart to chime in. So one of the questions is, what is the up-to-date list of labs that are being collected by the WFI for research? And so there are several lab tests that are being collected into the WFI registry. I can't remember the list of all of them. I can tell you there are things like glucose, triglyceride, cholesterol. Those are the ones that jump out of my head. And I can get you the list if you want that. And if either of you can remember which ones are submitted as well, that would be great. And then another question here is, what is the rationale of collecting total bili and total protein routinely if this is done? And I don't believe that we are collecting this in the WFI registry, but I'll let both of you comment as well. And then in particular, have LFT panels changed? Anyone?
I'm going to embarrass myself and say I haven't, although I was involved in formulating that list, I don't, the list of chemical, the things out of the chemistry panel that we collect, I think you mentioned mostly. It's, I know we collect, cholesterol, triglycerides. It's 8 or 10 lab parameters. The Wellness Fitness Initiative, the lab that it calls for is a complete blood count, a chemistry panel, some sort of urine. We start with a urine dip test, and then we send it out for a full urine analysis if the urine is positive, and a lipid panel. So that the list of lab required under wellness fitness is not very exhaustive. We're not doing a lot of exotic lab. We do get a total protein count as a part of a chemistry panel. It's not one of the tests that's being kept, or being uploaded as a part of the data collection process. I'm not sure whose question that was, and did we answer it adequately? I think they were all, now once again, where did this come from? You're going back to a panel of doctors and experts. Say again? Yeah, no, those are collected that was decided 12, 13 years ago as a part of a consensus process. The Wellness Fitness Initiative also was a consensus process, and that's why we had to go back and pare it down a little bit when we started collecting data, but there weren't any specific reasons to look at total protein and bilirubin, that they were just included in the chemistry panel that you can get for, $8 in mass. So that was the reason, but, and there are certainly people in here that know a lot more about this than I, but there are indicators of different kinds of metabolic processes in cancers sometimes, and so there were no really specific reasons. They were just included as a part of a chemistry panel.
Any more questions? We've gone through our list. Yeah, you had, yeah.
Really difficult. When I was at the fire surgeon's course 2 years ago in Phoenix, I asked the same question and from Dr. Bogucki, and it just, I haven't gotten a real set answer, but I have to say, in the year that we've been at Prince William County, we've picked up 2 congenital heart abnormalities on younger guys. One, in addition, had an athletic heart syndrome, who was a marathon runner, that probably saved his life with the treadmill. So I'm saying, well, you wait till 40? Do you wait till 40? I mean, some of these guys are out there running like, till their pants come off, and they've got hypertrophic heart. And this guy had valve abnormalities too. So I feel good about starting the treadmill a little bit earlier than 40, but because we've had some significant findings. But I still don't know, the fire guys still how do we work them up if there's an abnormal finding? Well, we have cardiologists, so they recommend what they want to do next. So it takes the question away from me, and we do a lot of stress echoes with abnormal findings. The fire department's paying for this. It's follow-up.
It's confusing for the docs. I'm sure it's confusing as hell for the fire service. So, I wish we had a better I wish we had a great screening test for subclinical coronary disease that was quick, non-expensive, valid, etc. And unfortunately, we just don't. Will coronary artery calcium scoring become that? It might. I don't know. But for right now, the best we have is stress tests. And what upsets me about 1582 is it has this pseudo-stress test in there, the submax thing, which gives people a false sense of security, that they are really stressing their heart when they really aren't. And all these people getting a clean bill of health, but maybe shouldn't be. I go back to the Blue Ribbon Panel, American Heart Association, American College of Cardiology, and sort of realize that fire service is a different group. They are a high-risk group, and you may need to start a little bit earlier than what they recommend, but that's sort of where I usually base my recommendations on.
I guess my comment to that is, in doing the test, you're really, as Dr. Hale said earlier, doing it for 2 reasons. You're doing it first and foremost for screening for cardiovascular disease. That's what you really want to catch. But I think underlying that, what you're also trying to do is to detect levels of deconditioning as compared to the prior year. And for whatever reason, when you put a firefighter and do a treadmill on them, they take that test very, very seriously, as well we do too, because they want to know what their numbers are. And they want to know, and it's an opportunity for us to give feedback one-on-one with that firefighter, and they're always wanting to know what their VO2 is as compared to last year, or how far they were able to go in further. So I see it, and our treadmill test is about $150. But the amount of teaching that you can get with that treadmill is huge. And beyond that, I think the firefighter has a sense of accomplishment in that treadmill environment that they feel like there's a measure that they have with regard to that. So for $149, I understand why, the American Heart Association won't come out, but for us, as far as firefighters and occupational athletes, it really goes a long way in counseling with the firefighter. So would you say anything else?
Yeah.
That's one of the criteria of why the American Heart Association says to do it, is to counsel people with multiple risk factors, in addition to prognosis factors as well. So that is a valid reason to do stress tests, is a guide to risk reduction.
Tom, we have a comment back here.
That just caught 2 guys just based on their treadmill from the previous year, the deconditioning from just the previous year where they had significant cardiac disease. That was, and it was just the gut feeling that since he was so deconditioned from one year to year that those both were referred and both had significant cardiac disease impending.
I would just add quickly to amplify something that Dr. Moffat said. You know, a medical economist would never recommend doing the things we do for the general population, but you folks aren't doing the kind of job that's normally done out in the general population. It's a physically extraordinarily hazardous and physically demanding job, and you do it, you know, inside an oven mitt. You do it in this turnout gear that prevents your body from, you know, the sweat from really cooling your body, so that adds an extra stress. So the justification is, you know, the kind of work that you do and the circumstances that you work under, you know, that we've decided to do this screening. But it's, once again, the Wellness Fitness Initiative, legacy cities or charter cities are kind of, you know, for the most part, they're larger municipalities, very affluent municipalities. So we have the quote-unquote Cadillac programs. Although the world is moving more, in the, you know, the medical communities actually starting to adopt more of this model that the fire department kind of has championed. You know, one of wellness and preventive medicine is now being, you know, incorporated into more and more large health care plans for the general populace. But what we do really can't be justified on a dollar basis. Although, you know, I would say this, and I think every other medical director from the wellness fitness cities would say this, we're clearly catching life-threatening diseases, either cancers or heart disease. And we're clearly saving lives with this. And, you know, how many per year and how many over the last decade, I don't know. We can't say precisely, but I think we all have a lot of kind of anecdotal stories about people that we picked up, you know, serious medical problems because of the program.
Mhm.
So,
Okay. I think time to wrap up. Yeah.